A lot of things are changing for creatives rapidly. Much of how I think my team has been able to adapt is because evolution and transformation is a part of like our ethos. So a lot of it has just been kind of like reading the climate, thinking about how we better support different clients, friends, colleagues, and honestly disruptors who are our favorite type of clients maintain their integrity as they are dodging various bullets.
Welcome, my good people, to another episode of the Heavy on Brand podcast. And I got my sister on the show today. I've been trying to track her down to get her on the ones and twos to really come in and spit this brilliance that I've had a chance to, witness and know over the past several years. I know her as Iffy, but my sister Iffy, how do you like to be introduced? And give us your full name.
I'll give my full name. Um, Ifeomasinachi. 13 letters, no middle name. I don't need one. Um, Iffy or Ify is perfectly fine. And I'm excited. I'm excited to be here. He hasn't been tracking me down, folks. I've been waiting for this invitation for a minute
No, no,
because
no.
you got to get on that. You got to get on, Carbon Threads A list
See, here we
to
go.
be
Here we go.
an expert on this platform.
Here we
So
go.
thanks for contacting me. I'm so excited to Mama, I've made it. I've
Nah,
made it.
nah, whatever. You sound like James.
Who's that?
Should we start there?
No.
For another
Hi
day.
James.
What's up, James? What's up, brother? But nah, I'm so glad to have you on. And just for the record, she has access to me, to my calendar, to my schedule. So, you know, she been dodging me. She been dodging me,
Oh
folks.
my gosh. Lies. This is not a great way to start a branding conversation. I'll tell you that.
Oh man, but how you been? What's up with you? How you doing?
I've been okay. The last time we shared space with each other, we were in Cannes.
Mm-hmm.
Learned a lot and have really thought a lot about space
Yeah.
and how important space is in how we tell our stories. Um, and even like what it means to be in a space for the first time. For
Mm-hmm.
both of us, that was our first time being there.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not it's rare for me to have time to have many firsts at this stage of my professional career, to go to conferences where I can see a difference or feel a difference or interrogate what does this mean. Yeah, this may be cool, but what does this mean for me in the long term?
Mm-hmm.
So a couple things that I recognize is that, you know after you and I got invited to be, at a couple different panels and just
Mm-hmm.
networking events. The first is like it may be my first time in a space, but I deserve to be in that space,
Thousand
right?
percent. Yep.
So a lot of it is just really calculating what are the spaces that I am showing up in, where are the spaces that I, maybe have not been intentional
Mm-hmm.
about stepping into, and what does that look like in this season. Um, and then, we always speak truth to power and realness. A lot of things are changing for creatives rapidly.
Yeah.
So much of um, much of how I think my team has been able to adapt is because evolution and transformation is a part of like our ethos.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of it has just been kind of like reading the climate,
Yeah.
and supporting different, thinking about how we better support different clients, friends, colleagues, and honestly disruptors who are our favorite type of clients maintain their integrity as they are, dodging various bullets. So that's what I've been up to. And for
Yeah.
those that don't know, our team runs, a boutique, multi-purpose, problem-solving and culture firm called Pink Cornrows,
I was going to tell him
and
that. No, but
We
go
always
ahead.
like it. We always like an introduction. It's always nice when somebody speaks kind of you in the rooms. And that's one thing I can rely on Brian Fitch.
Hey,
Yes.
yeah, that you know how I get down. That's part of my superpower. I like to believe, but not to go too deep into that. You are the founder and CEO of Pink Cornrows,
I am.
and I won't even try to do it justice as far as all the amazing work that you have done. But I know you refer to yourself and your team as cultural architects. You do a lot of movement strategy work. You do a lot of narrative work, and I've just seen firsthand just the impact of the thought leadership that you bring to a lot of the spaces that we've shared, just from a client level, just from even helping me rethink how we position certain things and how we communicate certain things with the clients that we work with. And so I feel like a lot of the work that you have done is very impactful work. And I definitely want you to share more information around that. But it's the tip of the spear when it comes to if you really want to make a movement, have an impact, build anything of significance, of meaning, of legacy. It starts with where you tend to start with from a strategic narrative standpoint and nailing it, so that people understand exactly why they exist, what they stand for, their purpose, their mission, their values. And I've just, like I said, folks, I can't rave enough about how smart this woman is. And I've just seen it
Oh,
time and
thank you.
time again. Yeah, and I'm dead ass serious. And I don't say stuff I don't mean. So, but I mean, there's
We
never been a
all
time.
know. Every conference room knows. Brian will sit there, say nothing, but when he parts them lips, let's. The uncle has spoken. We're out.
Sometimes, yeah, we got plenty of stories around there. Sometimes, you just gotta keep it a buck, man. You gotta keep it a buck.
Hmm.
But I'm always impressed with the insight and knowledge that you share. So I'll shut up and allow you to elaborate more on what you all do, the work that you've done in the past. I even want to hear, we talked about it, plenty of times, but what made you get into this space? I think that'd be interesting for everyone to understand.
So let's talk about like what it means to be consultants. A
Yeah.
lot of us are consultants, and the way consultancy has largely been crafted, especially in a capitalist society, is identifying the skills that you do the best and selling it,
Yep.
identifying clients that need that particular skill and then matching it. And there was a time, my first consultancy was actually in grad school. It was called Hype, helping you professionally excel.
I
And
didn't know that. How did
I
I miss
was
that
so
one?
hyped. I was 20, whew, I was 20, 20, 20, 21.
Oh
And it was a
wow.
way of me getting extra money while I was in grad school, helping people with, I wasn't really comfortable as a verbal communicator. I actually always thought there was something, yes.
Okay.
We'll get to that in a second. I think
That's no shade. That's no shade.
we'll get to
Yeah,
that in a
yeah.
second. There was a time where I felt like I was comfortable and maybe comfortable with all that came with being a quiet but truthful person.
Sure.
So I'm never going to be known as the loudest person, but like if it's a musical, I'm going to hit the soprano. If it's a debate team, I know the pros and cons. So when I speak, things happen, but I do think that it's taken me going through a longer journey in life that truth tellers are often attacked.
Mm.
And as a result, what that means is when you just want to when you want to be who you are, I think most people go into professions where they know that they want to be successful, but there's all these other competing things, including wanting to be normal, wanting to be
Yeah.
liked,
Yeah.
wanting to dot, dot, dot. And anything you choose takes time. That is your most precious commodity. But when you're living life, you're picking and choosing different value systems at that time. So I think when I started Hype, I was more comfortable with my written work. I was more comfortable with helping other people be their most hype self. But I do think that uh, there was something about me and something about how I was like stepping into my purpose of like more than what you can do, why are you here? Right.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, educationally, I think that's evident. I go into grad school, to study social science research and particularly in the behavioral sciences and how we communicate, why we communicate, but also how our differences activate different behaviors in other people. So, like my first
Mm-hmm.
published study was around blind date interracial reactions. What happens when, and this is pre Tinder, pre whatever, like just what happens when somebody comes to your door or there's an expectancy around who is showing up into your space,
Right.
and then they show up as somebody that is not the same race as you. Does that matter?
Mm-hmm.
What have you? And I think one of the things that it wasn't so much the study that meant a lot to me, it was that it was just how dope it is to be curious and put that curiosity into practice and
Yeah.
discover and while doing that, helping other people just on the side as a side hustle, um, communicate better and get their story across and really be as authentic as possible. I'm really proud of the fact that my first clients were close friends that were deciding to go to law school or deciding to go to
Yeah.
medical school, and helped each one of them craft their personal essays, which is like a huge part
Mm-hmm.
of how you share your journey and your story. And you know, they all got in, and I'm sure it was their grades and combination of activities, but it's so great to have those full circle moments where they felt like the application they put forward was not about what they perceived the other person wanted to hear. It was their
Mm-hmm.
truth.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then thought I was going to become a psychologist,
Mm-hmm.
went to law school, um, and still really was kind of discovering myself. But all through that time, again, consultancy, I could identify certain needs and was able to match the skill.
Yeah.
When it comes to pink cornrows and when to answer to full out that answer of like how did you get to pink cornrows, a combination of things, and you've touched on some of them. um, some of it was like being on the ground during the height of various movement activities, um, and there's some things that I consider movement that are not necessarily like mainstream, like post earthquake in Haiti,
Mm-hmm.
and being on the ground and learning from uh, victims of gender-based violence who then would create their own armies within the camps to protect women who
Wow.
at that time were extremely vulnerable to sexual-based violence because their homes were destroyed. So now they're exposed, their children are exposed. And what does it mean to meet with them and help share their stories, bring their stories, to larger audiences? And at that time, I had worked on bringing and actually convincing certain elected officials in DC to fly a Haitian delegation for them to share their stories about the post earthquake so that we can bridge the gap between bridge the empathy gap by having people actually be like, oh, this is not just a story, this is a person. Right.
Mm-hmm.
I can see this person. I can speak to this person. um
How did you get
and
pulled into something like that? Or not
well,
pulled into, but how did you get involved?
yeah, after law school, I went to get my LLM, which is so weird because it's actually considered a master's of law, and it's kind of
Okay.
weird because it feels like you're going backwards because a law degree is a terminal degree.
Yeah.
But for people that want a certain type of specialty, I went to get a specialty in conflict resolution and in advanced litigation. And but what I really wanted to do was policy. I would just tell people I want to do policy.
Mm.
Didn't really know what that looked like. But when I did eventually end up on Capitol Hill in DC, I was working for an elected that really was connected to the diaspora. And I feel like that was a godsend. I'm first
Mm.
generation American. There's a lot of assumptions that people have about everyone's blackness, right? Sometimes we're
Mm-hmm.
all washed the same. We're black washed the same, or
Yeah.
we're black washed to be to lean into the divides of who we are. Um, I grew up in a house where, and I think I've shared this with you before, that like inside the house, it was like coming to America, but then once you step outside, it was like Boys in the Hood, and
Mm-hmm.
reconciling those two worlds at times. Um, what the world taught me was that inside of my nuclear home, my parents, because that's all they knew, treated me as their firstborn Nigerian daughter. To the rest of the world, I was a black girl, whatever that meant. I was a black girl, so I was no
Yeah.
different than Tamika. I was no different than Shantae. I was just no different. In fact, the jokes that people would make around me, there were a lot of xenophobic jokes, making jokes about Africans, making jokes about, swollen bellies, all of this stuff. I
Mm-hmm.
would then, and I would hear it from friends, but then they would always turn to me and be like, "We're not talking about you, Ify, though. We're talking about the other Africans, right?"
Mm.
So I was always kind of the one that felt both exceptional and then also felt like I didn't always fit in with other people's perception of whatever black was.
Mm-hmm.
And while my dad was a political junkie, and there's some things that I got through osmosis, I don't think I really heard the word diaspora and really understood what it was until I was in this congressional office where my portfolio now meant tracking and covering certain foreign affairs, issues, which is, I think, is the, other than maybe economics, is like the largest learning curve if you don't
Yeah.
have that international background, right? So yeah, like he trusted me with certain, with just a huge breadth of issues. And I think it was my urgency to want to be useful and useful to
Mm-hmm.
my people. And at that time, without articulating it, recognizing that my people is global. And then I had the real responsibility of holding a portfolio at a time where funding was being ripped away from the issues that impact black people globally. So he was really serious about, like, I came in as a housing as a housing fellow thinking I was going to be
Mm. Okay.
focusing on urbanization and, you know all the things that I think impacted me growing up. What does it mean to have green space? What does it mean to build out environments where we can all thrive? And I still feel like that's a noble, worthy cause. And the first thing he said to me was like, "You're going to handle this little thing called Haiti." And I was like, "As in the whole country?" Like, what?
Wow.
And so I just went all in. Like I
Okay.
was like, I said I wanted to do policy. And from there it kind of took off a life of its own. I co-created the Haiti cholera working group on the Hill. So brought all these staffers together. Again, it was a minority group, not based on race, but just a few staffers because our bosses cared about Haiti, that we
Mm-hmm.
worked together. And and then I started taking delegation trips to Haiti, connected with an organization that doesn't exist now, but it was called Trans Africa, that Danny Glover was a part of. So
Mm-hmm.
to travel with Danny Glover, like to know him as the Lethal Weapon guy and that not so great role in Color Purple, to
Mm-hmm.
then be on the ground and see his passion for advocacy as we're meeting, the former president of Haiti, Aristide, and we're seeing the evictions of people by owners that don't want black people on their, they don't want their own countrymen on their land. And I don't speak Creole, Danny don't speak a lick of French, but he out there telling people, "This is not right. This is not right. We're
Yeah.
not going anywhere." And I'm here like, there are guns and machetes, but you know what? He said this is not right. And like there are videos of us
Mm.
like stopping an eviction.
Wow.
And I was just like, this is wild. Like not a
That's crazy.
high, like,
Yeah.
ooh, I love this, but just like, oh, we're really out here, in my opinion, in small ways, doing God's work.
Mm-hmm.
And all of this comes from just being curious about a space. Um, so yeah, I mean, PC is not a linear path.
Yeah.
The reason why I talked about consultancy is because I don't think there's anything wrong with creating a business that matches a need that earns revenue. Where PC I think is different is I like to believe that, and we are unapologetic about the fact that like we do have a worldview, we do have a vision, we
Mm-hmm.
do believe in we do believe that every client can be a partner in world building the spaces that we deserve. So it's hard for us to say we do one thing.
Yeah.
That's why we say we're problem solvers. What is your problem? And if there's alignment in, yeah, you know what? Helping clean those pipes aligns with our worldview. Let's partner together. It feels more like a partnership, but it actually doesn't start with the narrative for us. It actually starts with like the vision. What is the world that we are hoping that we can get towards? What is the world that we believe is possible, however radical it may seem?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
then, and to your point about narrative, and then what are the narratives that need to exist in the world for people to like align with both the path, but also believe that it's possible. So, some things I feel like you can put on a scope when you say to people like, "Yep, we can deliver communication
Mm-hmm.
services, research, narrative, and crisis comms." But then the other things that I think we also involve is like thought partnership. You're gonna get rigor and challenge as to like, is that the right strategy? You're always gonna have hope, and we're always going to be the ones to remind you of like the why, like why are you doing this, and sometimes that can be conflictual depending on the client, but that's I think at the core, it's an honor to build a consultancy that way,
Mm-hmm.
so that even when times are hard, we we still have enough of a why to partner with folks, regardless of the revenue, so that we can still keep making steps, however incremental, towards that vision.
See what I mean? See what I
That's
mean,
a
people?
lot.
I mean, yeah, it's a
Please
lot, but I
edit. I
mean,
need. I need. I need the edited cut version.
yeah, we'll do all that. I don't actually know because you just said too many good things. So this is my show. Let me remind you of
Oh,
that. So we're gonna
correct.
keep all the greatness in there. Um,
Correct.
but I mean, to what I was saying earlier when we were doing the intro, I mean, this is the stuff that I've been able to witness from Ife over the past several years. And I think, one of the things that I'll never forget, two moments I'll never forget, is I think the very first meeting you and I sat in together, it was a conference, and everyone was going around the table sharing kind of their perspective on a particular thing that we were working through with the client. And you began to give your perspective on what I can't remember what it was at the time, but everyone was captivated. I'll never forget that. I remember sitting across from you, kind of, and thinking like, "Yo, I don't know who this is," but she got it figured out.
Was
Let
this in
me.
person? This was in
Yeah, it was in
person
person.
or
It was down in
over?
Florida. Yeah,
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay.
yeah, yeah,
Aside from our Zooms, this was the first time we actually like met
yeah,
each other in person.
yeah. Like I think that was the first time I ever met you in life. Um,
I think you. I
yes,
think you.
I'm certain of
No.
it. I'm certain of it. I won't forget it. Maybe.
Okay.
Yeah, like yeah, we probably had been on Zoom calls together, but that was the first
Yeah.
time I was like, "Oh, well, who is that?"
Let me tell that meeting though, ladies and gentlemen. That was the first time I recognized. Please don't try to read Brian's face. Like Ryan was one of the people that I was like, "Yo, this brother is really like." And then here I go following up with a small working group. Like, okay, so what I think we need for this campaign, and Brian says like two sentences, like, "That's amazing," but then what do people do after they get onto the website? You need something more than that. And like went to get water, and everybody just like ripped up they back to the drawing board, folks. Who this cat? He sat here for 3 hours, said nothing. I remember that meeting.
I was just observing. That's all. I was taking in information. That's it. That's it. But the second thing I remember too is this is when I really I've always appreciated just your approach and just the strategist you are. But I think when we have been working through a number of concepts, and I saw your concepts come to life. And shout out to Jason, he was a part of that too. But you had all these ideas around movements and different ways to build these various movements in the form of like campaigns and things that were very, very tangible. And it's rare that I personally go into meetings with clients and there's someone else that's in the room that has already kind of figured out the narrative piece on the front end without CT or myself
Mm,
having to do that to do that work. And I was like,
mhm.
God, man, like I gotta tighten up. Like, but I was excited because the work was so dope. The ideas were so
Mm,
incredible. I'm like, man, we need to do more of that and more of this. So like those are
that's dope.
very specific moments that I'll never forget. That I was a part
Yeah,
of
we,
with you
we
for sure.
we were all role players. I think for people that don't know, Brian, myself, and the brother Jason that he mentioned, we all worked for an organization that was on the intersection of like culture, tech, and innovation, and all of us have skill sets that touch on branding,
Hmm.
storytelling, visuals. It felt great to, and it always feels good when you don't have to do all three
Hmm.
because my task then, that was the first client where my sole task was really not to necessarily focus on the visuals of the narrative
Hmm.
or the public display of the storytelling, both of both of which I'm concerned about. So that's why I think we worked as a team to like kind of
Hmm.
discuss, what those aspects are, especially if there are aspects that are so crucial to the storytelling that they just can't be compromised.
Sure.
But yeah, I will say likewise that the trust was there. Anytime you're working in a space with other creatives, number one, I think I'm just always blessed to be in a space of creatives and specifically Black creatives because we bring so much knowledge to the space and
Hmm.
we can talk in ways that aren't limited to academic formulas, but we also got those, right? So it's
Hmm.
cool to
Hmm.
see Carbon Threads formula on branding,
Hmm.
even if it's different from Pink Cornrows, and be like, yo, I follow it. Like,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
know on the other side of that equation, the client is going to get a dope product, right? Same thing with Studio J. Lauren. And I think once you recognize the dopeness that all three organ agencies, or however many for those that are listening, when you can building trust with other creators is really important. And I think some of it starts with like conversations like this that get a sense of
Hmm.
like how do you land the plane, right? Like
Yeah.
share with me campaigns that you've worked on and what is the end result. When you can follow somebody's journey and you can follow the methodology of how they move, then it's like dope. How do I fit in, right? Like I don't
Hmm.
every formula doesn't have to be one person's formula, but if you're holding the storytelling, if you're holding the narrative, then it's really about how do I help guide my partners as to like, yo, these are certain aspects that I'm thinking. This is what I would like to see. This is the wraparound conversation that we want the public to be having. But then like y'all do what y'all do
Yeah.
to make that happen. It's just multiple ways to skin a cat. And it's always really good when like all the different pieces are like both independently dope but also know how to collaborate.
Yeah. Another thing that is rare, but and I'm sure you've been in these spaces too. When you work with a client and there are multiple agencies at the table, it can be very easy for it to be kind of a territorial type situation. It can be a
Hmm.
piss and match in many ways. And it was never that with us. And to your point, we all kind of touched a lot of the same things, but I
Hmm.
think it was the shared understanding and respect and true acknowledgement of each person's just talent, right?
Yeah.
And removing the ego. Not that any one of us came to the table with any kind of ego, but you know, it's almost hard to not size up the other people, especially if they do something that you do, right? I
Mm-hmm.
think in many ways it's healthy competition, but it was never that kind of energy between us, and it happened quickly too for us to recognize like, yo, these are really really like partners, and I can immediately see like how great she is, her talent. I can immediately see Jason's talent and know like, you know what, he's even better suited for a lot of these things than we may even be. I know this is the
Mm-hmm.
space that we own. So I just really appreciated us being able to coexist in a way that did not become contentious. And it was really around, you know, wanting to do what was right by the client and the work and the mission. But then also, I feel like we each took a vested interest in the success of Pink Cornrows and the success of Studio J. Lauren. I felt like the both of you have always rooted for CT, and that it was just such a cool thing to be connected to.
Yeah, and I say this as a woman-led brand. I think another way of looking at it is that I actually believe in healthy ego,
Okay.
and not
Yeah.
and it doesn't necessarily have to be competition, but I could see how the two, you know, whether you come into it where it's like no ego. I just don't believe that no ego is real.
Yeah.
I hear when people say it, but I'm like, actually, let's flip it. So when I used to do mediation, or when I've done like hardcore legal contractual work, usually what
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to find out from the client is like, at the root, what do you want? Right?
Yeah.
What do you want? What do you want in life? What do you want from this transaction? That's all connected. A lot of it is connected to ego. Like some of it is material, but a lot of it is connected to how that individual feels that they what is it that they feel that they deserve, what is it that they
Mm-hmm.
feel they can contribute, but ultimately, like, how what is their calculus on winning.
Yeah.
And I think that for all of us, hands down, we're winners.
Mm.
Like, we're winners. And you know, you and I are former athletes. I feel like once you're an athlete, always an athlete, right? So
Mm-hmm.
that spatial muscle memory is like, just because you care about winning doesn't mean that you don't believe in team,
Right. Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Very few individual sports, and I've done both. I've played basketball and I've also done track. Track is a
Mm-hmm.
team sport, but it also has individual accountability. And so you can be a part of a lot of people don't even know that when you're a part of track club, for example, you can have a the clubs are competing, the coaches of the clubs are competing for points, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Where do your people on your team land and place, and for every 1, 2, 3 placement you get a certain number of points. But for the individual, you can be a part of a not so strong and technically on paper losing team and still be
Mm-hmm.
the dopest hurdler,
Yeah.
like, that's there, right? So
Yeah.
to me, I think that I wish there were more models around collaboration that dealt with the things that we have been programmed to think were negative.
Mm.
And I say that as a woman who at times I hear from people that are trying, not you, but I hear from people that are trying, they feel like they're trying to accommodate to what I want to hear, or what they believe that all femme folk or all non male folk or non dominant folk want to hear.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, nah, some of us are actually okay with ego. What we are
Mm-hmm.
able to deduce is my intelligence lets me know when the ego tells me you should fight for this or you shouldn't fight for this, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
think that, what if we're going to be transparent, what we encountered is there we all knew how to work with each other, and therefore if Brian felt really strongly about something, I always paid attention, because I was like, okay,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
something is informing him that's saying that the way this brand is going to excel, it needs to be executed in a certain way. And then for me, it's like, if that's not bruising my ego, if that's not going to change my bottom line or how I perceive we can win, I'm not pushing back against it. If it's
Mm-hmm.
something that I feel like, oh, that's going to be materially different
Yeah.
than, say, what the vision of the story or the brand is, then let's have that healthy discussion. So I'm just putting it out there, because I do think that how we win moving forward, especially with the change in society, has a lot to do with how comfortable you are winning, period. Like,
Mm-hmm.
be okay saying, I'm a winner and I need to win. And then also, I'm a team player and I like to win with other team players. So already
Mm-hmm.
right there, that lets you think about who can you work with, what personalities can you work with, but also
Yeah.
what are your barriers and what are your bottom lines. That's like, no, I'm this is actually really my thing, so I'm
Yeah.
not negotiating on this. And I'm fortunate that we got to be in a space where there was a considerable amount of safety for that to
Mm-hmm.
happen, and that
Sure.
doesn't always happen
Yeah.
with
Very true.
collaborators, whether it's the client pressure, the competition pressure, or what have you. But I do think some of it also comes from, especially as a people, we've been demonized for the strength of our confidence.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Always
that's
be.
just
Yeah.
my
No, I
philosophy
mean,
on the thing.
yeah, no, I mean, I agree with you. I love it. I love it. I love it. So you've been running PC for 5 years, 6 years,
5 going on 6. Yep.
going on six. And so there's always the core skill that you can lean into, and now you turn into a consultancy that you help advise clients in a number of different areas. But walk me through. Well, you always. I didn't realize you had started something while you were in college or fresh out of college. But I think the journey of an entrepreneur is definitely a challenging one, and I think in many ways we see it on the gram. We see it in a number of different formats or channels. Sometimes people don't necessarily acknowledge, or at least they don't want to share like the hard truths around it sometimes. And I think for you to be successful at it, and you've been successful, um, you almost have to take the good with the bad. What have you been able to do, or at least share with us some of the things that you've had to navigate or learn about yourself, relearn about yourself, kind of acknowledge maybe you didn't know before as you're building this firm, building this business, but then now you're leading other people who rely on you, who follow your vision in many ways. How has that process been for you? Because not a lot of people make it to 5 years. Not a lot of people make it to 6 years, right?
Right.
But you've obviously figured out something that has worked. Doesn't mean that you haven't made any mistakes, because we all do. I don't think you get into this. Um, you definitely earn your stripes with every year. But how has that shifted and affected how you've gone about building a business and really evaluate who you are and how you've evolved over the years?
Whew, I hear like 5 different questions in that.
Yeah, I have a bad habit.
Um, um, so there's something that your friend Bakari Sellers says
Mm-hmm.
a lot that sticks in my mind with a conversation that I had with him.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, I don't know if I'm successful. Success is for other people to determine. And it was wild when he said it because it relieved me.
Yeah.
Like, whew, okay, success is none of my business.
Yeah.
So I think it's important for the listener to hear. And again, I Hype was not my last consultancy. I had 3 other journeys, including co-founding another kind of like policy think tank right before PC.
Mm-hmm. That's what we talked
That
about in Can too, like that whole situation connected to that. Okay. Yeah.
we'll
Crazy.
leave it off of the podcast. It
Yeah.
was crazy.
Yeah.
It was crazy. Which is also to say that I had no problem saying this. Like, think think about team players more deeply
Yeah.
than just identity. Think
Mm-hmm.
about character, integrity, you know, and what does it look like? My mind as somebody who's trained in conflict resolution, I'm never thinking about what are things like when things are going well, because that's where people want
Mm-hmm.
to focus on success and wins. It's really, how do you lose? How do you
Yeah.
conflict? How do you
Yeah.
fight? I'm
Yeah.
more concerned about that. And it looks different in the professional world because people aren't necessarily coming to fisticuffs. Although
Mm-hmm.
sometimes I wish we could handle things in the way the street would handle things,
Right.
as long as everybody's still alive on the other side. And I say that to say that there's a truthfulness behind rage
Mm-hmm.
that I think gets covered with a whole bunch of toxic positivity in like the professional setting, which then means that when people are enraged, excuse me, or people feel like they're losing power or they want to regain control, there's a whole range of passive tactics that people use to do that, that for somebody like me doesn't really align with my ethos. Like if you really are
Yeah.
upset or you think that I'm going to take something that you got, dog, you might as well just say it, because unfortunately I have the gift of already seeing it. I'm tired of playing these games.
Yeah.
What do we need to do? And so that's one of the things I had to learn, is that your plan around business, it's so crucial for you to think through, even before your first hire, who would your first partner be?
Mm-hmm.
And if you want to be a solo entrepreneur, if you want to be an entrepreneur where you are running as a CEO, as a solo entity and not necessarily having this like expansive C-suite, there's nothing wrong with that. That
Mm-hmm.
means then how you partner with other people, there needs to be a lot more discussion around partnership, ownership, distribution of, not just revenue, but if there ever were to be a split of assets. We don't necessarily think like that until there's a problem. So people
Mm-hmm.
tend to have attorneys on retainer and tap them when the fire has already happened.
Yeah.
But if you
Yeah.
think more about maintenance,
Yeah.
then it's really, how do I consult with advisors and attorneys to give them the permission to ask me questions around, if a problem were to happen with partnerships in this way, are y'all prepared, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do y'all have
Mm-hmm.
a mediator on standby just in case there is a fire? So
Yeah.
just throwing that out there. So success is funny, because when you feel like you're still on a journey, it's like, I don't know if I've ever been concerned about being successful. I will say that I have all when you are an entrepreneur in this society, with you know you don't want to fail, which I've also evolved in my definition of failing. But what does failing really mean? What you don't want to be in debt. You
Mm-hmm.
don't want to be broke.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to, like, and both of those things kind of deal with the economics. And I think that that's where a lot of business owners, but especially black and or femme and or queer and or whatever these intersectionalities, you start a business really thinking about the both and of, like, I really want to do something that I like to do and that I'm good at,
Mm-hmm.
but ultimately I don't want to fail.
Right. Right.
When I started PC, we started differently. For, like I said, I think part of the reason why we are really good at helping people create, not like, visions and then the steps to achieve that vision, is because we started with vision first.
Mm.
We started with, and then we started with a vision, and we started with, like, oftentimes when we think about infinity, we think about infinity moving forward.
Yeah.
But for me, I thought about, well, what is really our bottom? And my thing is like, is that is it possible to create a business where there isn't really a bottom, i.e., that there really isn't a a a, a narrative that's around failure?
Mm-hmm.
And for
Mm-hmm.
me, it may seem silly, but for me, I actually said this when I graduated from law school. When people were like, "What are you going to do?" I remember saying, as long as there's a problem, I'll never not have a job. And I just knew that I know how to identify gaps. I'm a
Mm-hmm.
strategist. I like to help people solve things. I may not always be able to control the revenue stream for any of these strategies, but as long as there's a problem in the world,
Mm.
I can be there. I can fill it
Yeah.
in. So there's no bottom.
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
no bottom for me. Even if
Yeah.
PC itself doesn't necessarily continue, that may be a reality of circumstances or could be a choice. But as far as like how I show up to support stronger visions towards the shared ecosystem that we all deserve, that's always going to be the work.
Yeah. Yeah. You said a few things that really hit home for me, especially because before starting CT, as you know, I was at another agency, and I was a partner in the agency, and I didn't really take seriously the legal considerations that I need to, because things were working right. It wasn't until things stopped working and we ran into some challenges that I was like, oh, what about this? What about that? And it was a hard but necessary lesson, um, of just making sure that if you do anything else in the future, you have certain affairs in order, and you got to have the right conversations with people, especially as you get into partnership with folks. You got to have the right conversations as to, okay, when everything is working, like what does that look like, and when it's not working and we're at odds or we have a difference of opinion, what does that look like as well? Like you got to have those conversations because everyone wants to, in the beginning, right? Everyone wants to say, oh, it's going to be the greatest thing ever, right? But it's just not the reality, especially when you have people who have different perspectives, backgrounds, history that informs how they think about things, how they show up in certain spaces. And one of the things that you know, one of my other good friends, best friends, Rob, told me when I was kind of going through that time back then. He said, "Look, man, I don't know what you plan on doing, but if you ever consider getting another partner again, just make sure that they align, that there's value alignment there. It's not
That's
just
right.
about not just about whether or not this person is good at sales or this person is good at operations. It's like, do you have shared values? Do you view the
Exactly.
world? It doesn't have to be exactly the same, but there needs to be an understanding of well-being that you want to that what am I trying to say? There needs to be an understanding and an appreciation that you at least want to see, regardless of if we see eye to eye on something. I still don't want to see any harm done to you. I still want to make sure you're good. I still want to make sure that you win in whatever version that looks like for you, and not at the expense of others. So that was one thing that always stuck with me, and it resurfaced as you were sharing what you just shared, for sure.
Yeah, I my last experience, this is an interesting reflective moment because one of the things that I do think somebody of my ethos who is connected to impact work, and if we're going to be honest, in, a, a reputation of responding to either injustices or creating movement campaigns where
Mm-hmm.
the the money is not the incentive, like the money is not the motivating factor as to why we show up.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't
Mm-hmm.
mean that we won't be paid, and it doesn't mean that we will not be seen as worthy and that the compensation would not come through. But the reality is, I was not able to see that in a partnership, even if we were getting exactly what the client said they were going to give us for what we were producing, within the partnership of the partners of that firm, I couldn't agree more. If there's not a shared understanding of, I may not be driven by money, but that doesn't
Mm-hmm.
mean that I'm afraid of conversations around money,
All
and it
right.
doesn't mean that I don't want to make money. But it may mean that the choices or even the rooms that I'm in are going to be different than, say, a partner who specifically wants to be in those money rooms and ultimately sees the company growing into a competitor in a
Mm-hmm.
particular way. And that's really what it was that the vision of the company, I was seeing it as a problem solving, thought partner for different types of clients than
Yeah.
my other partner, who was seeing it as a competitive, was seeing it in a much more I think they would even disagree, a very capitalist centered
Mm-hmm.
competitor. There's a way where talking about that early on probably
Mm-hmm.
would have had us not even start a firm together.
Oh wow. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I mean, and it would
Yeah.
have been no issue. But we all live and learn, and when you go through being an entrepreneur, you know, hopefully people are listening to this in the way that your mama tells you, like, when the kettle is hot, don't touch the kettle.
Mm-hmm.
Like, believe both of us when we're saying you're gonna want to have these hard conversations around value sets to get a sense as to, even like, is there a goal that's maybe a milestone that
Mm.
allows you not just to reach a monetary milestone, but maybe a point of reflection to
Yeah.
be like, hey, we hit this milestone, is this still the right partnership? Do we need to create different divisions where you're handling this and I'm handling that? Like,
Mm-hmm.
there are a lot more possibilities, in my opinion, when you kind of imagine and play out conflict, because it just allows you to get a sense as to how does a person think through trouble,
Mm.
right, before the trouble even happens.
Because
And
it's coming.
unfortunately, yeah, with that firm, we didn't. The trouble came, and it was just
Mm-hmm.
irreparable. Um, but it did help me stop running away from, like, who I am as a professional,
Yeah.
um, and just be like, I am somebody who understands that sustainability is connected to funds and that money is a tool. I
Mm-hmm.
am not necessarily somebody who is driven on a daily basis to only focus on that. That being said, you may not be able to tell that from my client roster, because
Mm-hmm.
even for those that are focused on their bottom line, Pink
Mm-hmm.
Cornrows can can if you are bringing us in to support what it is that you're doing, there is room to understand that multiple things can be true at the same time, and we do have some alignment on what it means to instill equity, or to build out spaces, projects, programs,
Mm-hmm.
ways of
Mm-hmm.
being, ways of even showing up in the world
Mm-hmm.
that have mutual benefit. And
Yeah.
the way they say about partnerships, whether it's romantic or personal or professional, over time, I think, again, I like to think that there are some unwritten great things that rub off on our clients that maybe have been looking at their professional journey in a very binary way.
Mm.
Um, so I think that that's something that, for now, people get for free. I can't promise that if we find out how to monetize it, that the rate, yesterday's rate, is not today's rate,
It's not
but
today's rate. It's not today's rate at all. Nah, man. I mean, it's again, it's and we talked about it even before we hit press record, but you embody what this podcast is about. And it's not only you tapping into, I guess more importantly, like you've been able to identify and you can acutely say, this is what I'm about, right? It doesn't mean other things can't exist, but this is
right.
why, this is how I show up. This is why I show up. This is what is meaningful to me. And that process and that understanding of yourself bleeds over into the work that you do for the clients to help them do the same thing. Because when you're talking about narrative, it's synonymous in many ways to branding, right? Who you are, how do you show up, how do you communicate that to the masses? What are you what are you willing to stand 10 toes down on, right? And what do you not compromise and negotiate, right? And it's such a cool thing to see someone who lives and breathes that for themselves, but then has figured out a way to do the very same thing for the folks that have problems that need to be solved, and you solve them in a way that's true to you, that's true to them. But then, ultimately, I won't say ultimately, not only does it help them further along that movement, whatever that looks like, but there's real business impact for showing up
Hmm.
that way. And
Yeah,
so you know how we get down around this. Like it's sometimes people shy away from that, and it's like, no, that's the absolute thing you need to be leaning into.
exactly. I mean, it's so funny as you were talking. It reminds me of like the ways brand and narrative dance together.
Yeah, yeah.
And I can hear when people talk about their brand, or I want to work on my narrative, and sometimes they actually mean their brand, but they're
Hmm.
using the term narrative. So even just some brief, like, you know baseline definitional setting, I would love for people to think of their brand as their reputation, or
Hmm.
as their identity in a given moment, usually in comparison to the market, or the, you know some type of environment. And environment is twofold. Environment is the audience that you're trying to attract,
Sure.
and environment is also your competitors, right? So like brand is literally there as an identifier, and in a market it's also there to distinguish, like, why are you
Hmm.
different, and
Yeah.
why should somebody go with you, or why do you exist. And the narrative is there to support the brand, right? The narrative allows for the allows for the brand to be true. Like
Yeah.
it's the story that allows for the brand to be true, and specifically at that moment. But because narratives are also dynamic,
Yeah.
and narratives flow with you, your brand can change, but your narrative is also has two parts, which is the story that you tell, but then also what is it that people actually feel,
Mm.
right? And sometimes that
Preach.
last part doesn't happen till much later on, when people are and be, when people are reflective and think about Apple. Leaders have come and
Hmm.
gone,
Hmm.
tools have come and gone, some have been better than others, but the narrative will always be around transformation and innovation, even if the brand at any particular time is static, or
Right.
represents a certain period in time, right?
Right. Right.
And the brain, and then the question you should be asking is, what part of the narrative existed when this part of the brand was there,
Yeah.
right? And how has that changed, or how have they remained consistent to themselves? And I put that out there because oftentimes we talk about narrative as being kind of authentic and blah blah blah, and when people hear authentic, the assumption is that your narrative has to almost always be the same at every stage, and it's actually not necessarily the case. It's like,
Hmm.
it, the way human behavior is, in many ways, an organization, a company, a campaign, the hope is that what I show to you as a logo, which is part of the brand,
Hmm.
lands as my truth, my authentic truth. And that is connected to the story. Otherwise, it's just a logo.
Yeah. Yeah.
And while there is a part of your narrative that you control, there's also the part of your narrative that has to be validated by other people that feel you,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? I don't care how much you spend on a brand. There has to be a part that's like, yeah, but that doesn't align with your story. And I think that's sometimes why, um I mean, right now we're seeing a whole battle with this whole Cracker Barrel thing, and
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm trying to get into it. But if I were to look at it objectively, what is it that people were really saying? For the record, for people, if people haven't recognized, I
Hmm.
could care less about anything with a cracker, and I could care less about anything Cracker Barrel adjacent. That goes for you too, Denny's. I'm not with it. But if I were to look at it from a storytelling perspective, what was clear was that the brand,
Hmm.
for a lot of people, also reminded them of a story. Whether I agree with that story or not, they felt like that brand is super authentic to who we are, what our
Hmm.
values are, and we don't want to see any changes in that. And so that's, to me, that's when the ways that your story and even the stories in other people's minds, how it can be more powerful than even the brand. Because here's a company that's corporate, it wants to
Hmm.
evolve, it wants to move forward, but the audience said to them, hold on, partner, we like the story
We
of
like the
Cracker
story.
Barrel.
We
We
like
would
the
like to
story.
see the cracker and we would like to see the barrel. And it ain't
Uh,
real without it. That's like, however you feel about what that story is, to me, that's how powerful a narrative is. And that's
yeah.
how people should really think about. I think there's a lot of money that goes into brand because we are an image driven, and you've heard me say this, like
Hmm.
we are an image driven society, but I
Yeah.
don't think people actually understand that the connective tissue between a brand and you is the story. And
Hmm.
so that part to me is the part that really gets me, you know what I mean, that really gets me excited.
Yeah, it's funny. I was in another meeting yesterday, and we were talking about the same thing with Cracker Barrel, and someone was like, "I wonder how much money they spent on that rebrand." And it was probably, we know, like, oh, probably millions, right? But but if people thought about, take that situation out of it, I think this is good advice for anyone, large, small, medium size. It doesn't matter. If you can start or you can reset the clock with your brand and think about how your people are going to feel, how you make them feel first, and really unpack a lot of that stuff, then I think the visual identity or the verbal identity connected to it, whatever that is, then becomes a lot more, like a lot easier to communicate and share. I think sometimes too many organizations don't lead with, well, how do we want people to feel? Like, how do we? They just don't think about it. And I mean, we've been in rooms, to where that is like, you get so caught up in, your own thing and what you want to do as a brand, and you just sometimes just forget what you actually mean to the people that you serve and how emotionally connected they are to you and how you need to show up for them. And so when I hear you speak about everything that you just mentioned, I mean, it just takes me back to that, and it's honestly just kind of I hate to call it branding 101, but it's an easy thing to overlook, but it's such a powerful thing if you know how to harness it, to be able to drive results, whatever that looks like. It's just such a difference maker to always keep that customer top of mind around just how do they feel? How should we be making them feel, and how should we be showing up for them?
And I think that's part of the reason why I want people to understand when I say I am not a capitalist,
Mm-hmm.
again, there's capitalism in the simplistic way that people define it, and oftentimes it's the wrong definition, usually connected to a system where people make money
Sure.
or where there's free enterprise, you can start a business and you are competitive. Well, okay, but also if I'm starting a business, I would like for there to be an ecosystem that also makes sure that my business is successful. I would like for the rules to be the same regardless of who's playing. There's a whole level of capitalism that is, let's just say, anti what I is even anti what I think people would accept if they knew the
Mm-hmm.
fullness of what it was.
Mm-hmm.
But pushing all that aside, part of the reason why I think capitalism is not helpful for creatives, especially when we're talking about brand work,
Mm-hmm.
is it's lazy.
Yeah.
So what often happens, and you and I have been in those spaces where people want to create a brand that does what a narrative does,
Mm.
and they want the brand to be sexy enough for people to then want to jump on what they're doing and think that what people stick to is, again, an image or a
Mm-hmm.
video.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in a society where the average attention span of reading an email is 11 seconds, if that's the case, you're gonna have to think of how much collateral you're gonna have to put out into the world to
Right.
get people on that high to especially if you're not necessarily thinking about the supplemental story and the events and the meaning behind, or the philosophy as to why you're even putting this out there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Capitalism is forcing people, everybody, to be a brand, but again, for which is like, it is what it is. And where I think PC looks at it is like, how can we help these brands not only see themselves as storytellers, but how can we get them to also align that their story is connected to a larger vision of what we all deserve. Now that's different, because if you understand what that North Star is, then reverse engineering will allow you to create meaningful events, meaningful dynamics, meaningful relationships. You can fuck up on your brand here and
Mm-hmm.
there,
Mm-hmm.
but and you can evolve in your brand, but you moving and flowing, your narrative should be a flow, but
Mm-hmm.
it should be an intentional flow. And to the point that you just raised, I don't know if I don't think that the drive to just make money
Mm-hmm.
supports meaningful narrative, because meaningful narrative is is really about thinking about like, what happened and why does it matter?
Yeah.
And oftentimes that means that you have to wait to be in the right time to tell that last part, why
Mm.
it matters. We want to
Mm-hmm.
convince people with our brand and our website that we matter, but it has to be over time that you
Yeah.
matter. And
Yeah.
I think sometimes time, which is our greatest asset, we oftentimes kick it to the side chasing money, which is still a tool. But what happens when you put money and time together? Like, I
Mm-hmm.
think that that creates a well-rounded strategy. And we even see it. I mean, I'm gonna step out for a second because I know we're running on time, but like,
Mm-hmm.
we even see it with like, we even saw it with like Kendrick and Drake,
Oh yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
right? There was this one line I've been revisiting last summer, the greatest summer in rap, the greatest summer in a while in hip hop
Oh
history.
man.
And thank you to YouTube. This is not a promotion for YouTube, but thank you for all the YouTubers who created reaction compilations. Because if you want to talk about something that carries narrative, it's when
Ooh.
other people believe in your brand.
Yeah.
And what we saw was part of one of Kendrick's lines about
Mm-hmm.
what makes somebody the greatest. He
Mm-hmm.
debunked this theory that, like, oh, just because you throwing out songs every 2 weeks,
Yeah.
you know what I mean, that makes you the greatest. And he's there talking about some, I'll be making stuff in your, circadian rhythm. And people were like, cicada? What's a cicada? Like, people don't even know how to. But what he was really saying is like, I'm creating stuff like at times when nobody's thinking about me in the middle of the night,
Mm-hmm.
and it'll be that phenomenon in the sky. Like, he brought in astrology, which is also like imagery, allegory, but the whole point was like, my I am more authentic, and I am perceived as authentic, not just because of what I say or what I put out, but how I put it out.
Mm-hmm.
And I am. Yeah, he had that one line to Drake where he was like, basically, between us two, you the only one that is happy being famous. You want to be
Mm-hmm.
famous.
Mm-hmm.
And what I think it did is it challenged listeners to be like, what is the point of all of this?
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
we are considering greats based off of how many times you're out there, how visible you are, how much you
Mm-hmm.
tap dance, how much you
Mm-hmm.
do specials, then sure, that's a measurement. But if we're going to measure it based off of quality, authenticity, creativity, rigor, and the character of the actual artist, I
Mm-hmm.
think that that's where for those in this moment that are thinking about being a brand, and I've been
Mhm.
asked this question, I've been on other branding podcasts, and I have, they told me like, you're known for this, and this. I'm thinking of this one podcast. You're known for this, and this. So tell us a little bit about your brand. And I was like, well, the first thing is I'm not a brand. And she was like, hold on, Iffy, my whole podcast is about brands. You are a brand. I was like, I'm not a brand.
Yeah.
And I wanted, and it's possible that I am known for certain things, and I could also be in denial that
Right.
I am a brand. What I would like to say is that I like to create a little bit of distance between myself and the work. I would like to
Mhm.
think. But the
Mhm.
reality is who I am
Mhm.
and what I do matters. And ultimately, I think that many organizations are struggling now for a lot of reasons. And one of them is at some point in time, who you are, not as just an individual, but your leadership, your team, or what have you, it will catch up with your brand,
Yeah.
right? It'll catch up
Mhm.
with what you have put out there. And there may be a lot of people that may not care and just read kind of like the headlines. But if you want to build a loyal base, a loyalty only comes through trust. And so
Mhm.
people have to trust that who you are and who you perceive to be is not necessarily a perfect being, but one that'll travel with them, one that is willing to keep keep them informed, one that cares about um, you know that can see through, like, yeah, I understand if you got to show up in a particular way, but at the heart of the matter, I
Mhm.
know who you are. If people don't know who you are at the heart of the matter, then it's hard, in my opinion, to keep everything in, above in the black, if you will. Like, it's hard
Yeah.
to just
Yeah.
keep. So I do think that there are a lot of different things that are definitely competing against entrepreneurs right now, which is part of the reason why it's like, if you got the time, while you got the time, definitely perfect your brand
Mhm.
and think about your narrative, and think about what are those 2 to 3 things that no matter what happens, I want this through line. I want it to both be said, but I want it to be felt, and I want it to be
Mhm.
real,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, when I was in law school, I ran for student government president and
Mhm.
won. I was the first black student government president at that law school. And my campaign, so we were running, and I say campaign, and I kind of smile a bit because nobody else had a campaign. Like, people just kind of put their names out there and said they was running, and here I am in every student's mailbox putting in a flyer because
There you go.
I'm assuming that everybody, that's what everybody does.
Mhm.
It's an election,
Right.
so I'm putting a flyer, and to this day, people still talk to me about that flyer. And you gotta imagine, like, I came into law school, like, damn, almost almost 100 pounds lighter than how I am right now, no lie. Huge blonde afro. Um, and I put this flyer, and it was a picture of my face with the afro, but it was almost like positioned in a
Mhm.
pose that like Angela Davis would do.
Mhm.
And the flyer said, she may be iffy, but she's not confused. And let me tell you something. To this day, to this day, don't let me pass nobody from CUNY Law School, because like the way people are like, she may be iffy, but she's not confused. It's like,
Need to resurface that one. I like that. That's dope.
and it's just great. Like, there's no brand, there's nothing that I'm trying to uphold right now.
Yeah.
There's no, you know what I mean? Like, there's no, I don't even move with this brand of like, and that's why I'm the strongest leader that should lead your organization and your
Right.
campaign.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't care about that. But what matters to me is that while I think people think it's funny, it was actually, what actually means something to me is the way people have been following like my journey, my work.
Mhm.
And I know that there's a part of it that's like, yeah, she's actually not confused. And I think it
Yeah.
means more to me that that part remains true.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
anyway, if folks really focus on like what's the part of you that remains true, especially in moments right now where so much of our story, of who we are is being challenged, is being erased, is folks are trying to intimidate us out of what we are owed, right? So
Yeah.
we're the
Yeah.
ones doing the changing and the scrubbing instead of like holding ground. And there's a lot of reasons why folks would need to be on the defense, but also recognize that there's sometimes a cost to being on the defense if the narrative isn't ingrained, right? If the
Yeah.
narrative
Yeah.
is not a part of the brand, you can have a floating brand out there that don't got the cousin of a narrative to help it
Right.
out. And now you're the one asking, well, who are we then?
Yeah.
Who am I?
Yeah.
So yeah.
So, man, I should have told people at the beginning of this episode to get your notepad out because as, as I knew you would, you were going to be dropping gems throughout, and it's a masterclass, man. It's a masterclass on branding, narrative work, just being who you are. So, my sister, I appreciate you so much for
Yeah, thank you for having me.
one, just being on the show, but just always being such a supporter of what we do. I feel like I can hit you up and we can bounce around ideas, work through challenges. I just love the relationship that we've been able to build over the years, and so it's just an absolute honor to have you on the show and give people a peek into what I've been able to see for several years now. And so thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you. And best of luck for the rest of the season. This is a really dope podcast.
Yeah, where can people find you?
Where do I want to be found? That's a good question. People can visit the website, pinkcornrows.com. If people want to know a little bit more about me, they'll have to spell my name correctly. So it's Ifeomasinachi.com, which, okay, fine, I'll spell it for you guys. IFeomasinachi.com. And, for the social works where I'm kind of visible, it's IFY _works, so Ify Works. And I'm also on LinkedIn for as long as I'm on LinkedIn.
There you go. Well, cool, folks. Thank you again for joining us for another episode of the Heavy on Brand podcast. Until next time, appreciate you. If you enjoyed this episode of the Heavy on Brand podcast, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification button. If you need more information on all things marketing and branding, check us out at thecarbonthread.com. Until next time, stay heavy.